it's Tuesday, November the 3rd, and your book published, no, tonight's Thursday, November the 3rd. Your book published on Tuesday, you
Yeah.
know that, right?
It will. It will next week.
Oh, so we're actually ahead of
You're
schedule?
ahead of schedule.
Oh!
Yeah. You got the sneak peek?
We did. This is so exciting. Now, Marcia from me spells trouble. Last time she came, there was a gunman in LAX. Do you remember that? We had constant updates from Marcia through the course of a very long day. And eventually you got here at 7:45 p.m. or something, having started out at 9 in the morning.
Yeah.
That was really an ordeal for you.
It was crazy. I'm sitting on the plane, and the next thing I know, I'm getting a text from CNN saying, "Hey, can you tell us what's going on with the gunman?" No, what are you talking about? This mind my business. And then they took us off the plane, and then we got herded into this great big, like, other section of the airport I never knew existed, and we stood there for hours, and some people, like, go dollar past really fast. It's like, I swear to God, they were starting to hand out peanuts. We'd only been there 20 minutes. Handing out peanuts, and people are like jumping over, climbing over each other to get these damn peanuts. Like, it's been 20 minutes. They're going to start eating us, you know, in an hour. It was crazy.
Wow, like Donner's Pass, except
Exactly.
at the airport.
Exactly.
Oh.
Yes, I mean, there's no snow. Everything's cool. Look it out.
And yeah, the trouble is, once you're there, it's sort of hard to just turn around and say, forget it, you know? I mean, there's a point when you travel in which there's a momentum. It's really hard to undo it. I do this a lot, you know? There's always a point of no return. When I look at Rob and I say, whatever happens.
We're going. It was also, I was pissed.
Mhm.
I was pissed. I'm not going to let this jerk ruin everybody's good time. You know, I mean, the heck with him. So, that was
Right.
the other part.
So when I drove out of my driveway and the rain was sheeting down, and I thought, of course it's Marcia.
Of course,
And
yeah.
like, Aunt Carrie or,
Of course it is.
Yeah,
I'm surprised it's not snowing.
Oh, please, you know, that would be really exciting. That would be wonderful. Well, it's lovely to see you back, and actually, this is book 2 of your new series. So what prompted you to write about Samantha Friedman?
So the thing is, I've been a defense attorney, criminal defense lawyer, as long as I've been a prosecutor. So, and I just never kind of, you know, exercised that side of things. I started as a defense attorney, and then went into the DA's office. And then after I left the DA's office, in the past 10 years, I've been doing court-appointed appeals for the indigent. Because in California, probably here too, when you get convicted of a felony, if you can't afford a lawyer, and by the time they're convicted of a felony, they're tapped out, the court appoints one to represent you in what is called a direct appeal, which is an appeal based on the record. And so what we are is error catchers. We look through the trial transcripts to see if he was sentenced properly, if there were rules, you know, evidence rules that were broken or anything like that. And so I've been doing that for 10 years. And I thought, well, you know, I'd like to, it's kind of fun to take the other side of things, because a prosecutor you really can't mess with too much in terms of even fiction. They pretty much, they have to be straight and clean and true, and if they're not, you don't want to read about them. No, but I don't think so. But a defense attorney isn't bound by those kind of restrictions. And not only that, but I could write a character who was much more unusual, shall we say, a darker character, more twisted character, one with a much more challenging childhood and upbringing and a lot of issues as a result of that. And she has her own view of justice, which is unique. So.
Well, she is morally ambiguous, and I thought that was a change, because as you say, Rachel couldn't. I was thinking, Rob and I are addicted. I wrote this to those of you who happen to read the e-news today. Rob and I have been watching Blacklist season 3. Did any of you watch the James Spader? I mean, I love it, right? And I thought it was fiction until the FBI and Mr. Comey came out the other day, and they realized that Blacklist was actually live. It's like, seriously, you know, they're really doing this. And, you know, I mean,
The show writes itself. I mean, really.
no kidding. You know, I think it's absolutely fascinating. And in the aftermath, the investigation of what's going on at the FBI, aided by justice, may transcend everything else that has been part of this election.
It's true.
You know, because what happened is they stepped in and took a prosecutorial role, which is not theirs.
Right.
You know, they stepped out of their job,
Right.
and you can't do that. It was like the Supreme Court when it made a couple of controversial decisions in land. I mean, Citizens United is my idea of the worst Supreme Court decision ever.
By far.
But, you know, Gore versus Bush, right? I'm trying to get Gore versus Bush. The Supreme Court actually became a political, body.
Yes.
And
I think that's the first time we really saw the Supreme Court take a position that seemed to be, I did not read the decision, so I cannot tell you, from a legal
Right.
standpoint. But it did feel like it was a political stance they took.
Of course it was. They're not supposed to be in the electoral process. Actually, as old as I am, some of you may remember all this, but there was a deal made when Eisenhower ran for president in 1952. They never really acknowledged it. It was pretty clear to everybody that Earl Warren was his only serious challenger for the Republican nomination. So it became quite clear that when he became Supreme Court Justice, as soon as Eisenhower was elected, that there had been a little bit of a trade. What nobody expected was that Earl Warren, like the last man on earth, you would have thought of it, became this incredibly activist Supreme Court,
really did.
Chief Justice. And then he actually, they wound up legislating things. So they stepped into Congress's role, not the president. But they made a number of decisions that were legislative rather than judicial. And there's did any of you see the documentary called Rosenwald when it played here? Maybe not. It was at Harkins and all over New York and so forth. But anyway, Julius Rosenwald was a Jewish philanthropist who started Susan Roebuck or became president of it. And he built black schools all over the South. They were called the Rosenwald schools. And what he did, which I thought was really smart, was that he gave them a grant. He didn't just give it to them. He gave them a grant, and then they had to raise some money, and it became like a community center and a community active thing, and they were terrific. And you know what undid them? I always wondered, because actually Julius Rosenwald was my husband's great-grandfather. When I watched the Rosenwald movie, it was revealed to me that Brown versus Board of Education in 1956, the decision that desegregated the schools and was supposed to make everything better. The negative effect on one side was that these black schools that were terrific, the Rosenwald schools, all had to close. Because it was the other side of separate but equal. And now the National Society for, the National, Historic Preservation and the Smithsonian are taking the Rosenwald schools that are surviving and turning them back into community centers and making them back into the heart of the black community. So you never know when you make one of those decisions.
All the repercussions.
It's like the dark web,
Yeah.
I mean, no, seriously, it really is. So has that happened to you in your, leaving aside the obvious decision? Have you run into that as a prosecutor or defense attorney that, stuff you thought was going one way turned out to go another?
Well, sure.
I'm wearing my Cubs shirt, and for every OJ question, we're going to talk about the Cubs.
I love that idea.
I know, I knew you'd like that idea.
Wonderful.
Right, I wore it on purpose.
I think it's great.
It's probably the only time I'll ever get to wear it. I'm just so proud. Yeah. Nonetheless.
You know what? When you have a jury involved,
Yeah.
with people, wherever people are involved, unexpected things happen because you never know how things are going to combine and what happens after this. You plan this, and then you have to think about the next 10 steps. And even if you do play them out, something comes in from left field that throws it all a monkey wrench in it. So yeah, I mean that happens a lot. That's I think one of the biggest things about being a trial lawyer is the ability to roll with the punches because you never know. A witness takes a stand and says something completely different than they ever said to you before. You have to deal with it. So. I mean, that's kind of the gambler's aspect of being a trial lawyer on either side, whether you're a prosecutor or defense.
Well, it's the basis of the, don't ask a question to which you don't already know the answer because it's not usually going to.
But even if you do know the
Right,
answer,
sometimes.
you think you do.
But I was looking at this interview you did with the Huffington Post last May when Blood Defense came out because there's some very nice quotes up there. And one of the things you said was, as a lawyer, I came to understand early that storytelling plays an important part when you address the jury.
Oh, for
See,
sure.
I've always thought the person who told the best story got to win. Even in the face of all evidence, some lawyers have been able to convince a jury, to rule in a particular way.
It depends. Usually it's not because they told a better story. Usually it's because they have appealed to, when it's a matter of the evidence says this and they do that, it has to do with preset judgments, biases that have nothing to do with the evidence. And that doesn't necessarily have to do with racial. It could be gender. It could be anything.
Right.
They bring in a set of biases that make the bias guide their decision instead of the evidence. And if the evidence conflicts with the bias, they go with the bias. That's what that's usually when you see those kind of weird verdicts. Generally speaking, it's not because that person told a better story. It's because it's the story they wanted to buy.
Okay,
you know.
that makes perfectly good sense. Well, I also brought that up because it seemed to me that your career as a trial lawyer really set you up to be, or enhanced your storytelling skills so you write books. Is that right?
Oh, for sure. You know, I think I'm never aware of exactly how much all of my years of experience as a trial lawyer informs all of these stories. I know now, looking back on them, at the time when I first started writing novels, I didn't think they did. I thought, no, I just making it all up and nothing's really coming from it. And then I started to look back after like third or fourth novel, I looked back and thought, well, no, that's not true. Little things came through that definitely were parts of my life and parts of the people I knew and the trials that I'd had. And at this point, with doing now the second book in the Samantha Brinkman series, it's very clear to me that all of my life experiences are coming in through these stories, through these characters, one way or another. And most definitely they, you know, in every book, especially now with the Brinkman series, I address issues that I find to be, that are socially important or legally important. And in moral defense, I look at the issue of adopted children as well as the issues of child abuse. Through a prism that makes it not icky, you know what I mean? Because that subject can be so horrible that you can't deal with it. So I don't do it that way. But I also want to be able to talk about these issues through the prism of a novel, through fiction, because that is part of trial work too. You're always dealing with these social issues of and justice, issues of justice and fairness and bias. And so it's important to me to keep doing that through these novels so that you're learning as well as having fun and being entertained. So absolutely, I think my life, does kind of have everything to do with what I'm writing, and I'm more aware of it now than ever.
We didn't talk to you about Blood Defense, so could you go back and tell us, a little bit about the setup and the plot of Blood Defense, and then we'll talk about the new book.
Now I have to remember.
Sorry, I know.
how it is.
That's a cruel question to ask an author. They've moved on.
You know. So Blood Defense is the first in the Samantha Brinkman series, Samantha Brinkman being a defense lawyer, criminal defense lawyer, raised by a single mother who is a monster. She's a narcissist, never wanted to have the child, dragged her, Samantha, as a child through boyfriend after boyfriend, looking for the richest one she could find. And she was very beautiful, so that was not that hard for her. And then Samantha actually wound up in a situation where her mother's boyfriend was worse than just a bad guy. And that scarred her kind of for life, but she eventually pulled up out of it when her mother, at a certain point, and got herself together and went to law school, became a criminal defense lawyer, one who really, really, really hates police because they did not do right by her when she was a kid. But she winds up defending a detective who is charged with a double homicide, a murder of an actress and her roommate, Chloe and Paige, and it becomes a national sensation. He winds up hiring Samantha to represent him, which took some doing because her first reaction, even though she needed the money very badly, she was in private practice for just a few years. She had left the public defender's office trying to make a name for herself, barely pays the rent, and her best friend from childhood, Michelle, is telling her, you've got to take this case, you want to step up in the big leagues, or at least pay me once in a while, take the case. So she did, and that's Blood Defense. A lot of twists and turns in that, and I can't reveal them.
No spoiler, because I think many people tonight, how many of you have not read Blood Defense as well? Okay, so there you are,
So,
right.
good, don't tell, I won't tell.
Yeah.
But you'll see there's a number of big twists in it, and there's one about a third of the way through the book anyway, that sets up a whole lot of other dynamics. In Moral Defense, the second book, there are certain threads and stories that I planted in Blood Defense that I pull through in Moral Defense. So it is a good idea to read Blood Defense first. I didn't used to say that with Rachel Knight. I kind of wrote them as standalone things, but really the Brinkman series seems to be the way I'm writing it, is that I'm pulling the threads through because I just thought, I'd like to be able to write it that way. Like what's happening with her now? She got herself into a whole lot of trouble with various things that she did in Blood Defense. Okay, they didn't just go away. These things have a way of coming back to bite you. You think you've taken care of a problem, and your cure created even bigger problems, and that's what happens with her. So Moral Defense pulls through a lot of the things that were set up in Blood Defense. And the presenting case in Moral Defense is a horrific slaughter of a family in a quiet bedroom town, Glendale, where I used to live. Suburban, it's about I'd say 15 miles outside of downtown LA. And so it's a really quiet, Andy of Mayberry kind of place. So the whole family was slaughtered, save the young daughter, the youngest child, who was 14. And Cassie Sonnenberg becomes Sam's, Sam starts to help her because she just needs an advocate because there's no family to take care of her, and she's adopted, and she doesn't have any known real relatives. The farther away relatives live far away, so she really has no family. Sam comes in at the request of the school to help her out, and then other things happen.
So, in describing the way you're approaching writing these novels, does the current hot market for serial television have any influence on you?
You know, I never thought of that till you just said it.
Oh, that's why we do this, isn't it?
I know.
I
We do this.
I know.
You know, now that I think about it, maybe so. Because I do like those serial. I love
You do.
Making of a Murderer and The Jinx. And, you know, I mean, they're just, it's addicting.
What about Rachel? Did I remember that there was some kind of video, film future for Rachel?
Yeah, there was. So TNT picked up the option on Rachel Knight series, and we shot the pilot
Mhm.
with Julia Stiles as Rachel Knight, and Rose Rollins as her friend Tony, and Elizabeth Rome as the police officer friend Bailey. But they did not pick it up to series. Now with Samantha Brinkman, Blood Defense was optioned by ABC Studios, and we are writing a pilot for NBC, the quick pilot, so we have a shot at really shooting this pilot.
That's great. Actually, this kind of a series, literary series, is actually a wonderful basis for a television series right now. I love the fact that serial television can do things for books that movies just never. We had a really interesting discussion with Michael Connelly about that Tuesday night, about how he's working on Bosch, which has now been approved for its 4th season. He actually takes pieces from the books and puts them together. It isn't necessarily the whole book, because the TV scripts are different and all, but you have to have this sort of body of work before that can happen, or you just go into writing scripts instead of books, and that would kind of be the end of it.
Well, the good news is I'm not writing alone. There are 2 showrunners writing
good.
with me. Yes, that's a good thing, and they're really terrific. So, a book can never be exactly translated to
Right.
TV, right? Because there's so much. It's a visual medium. In a book, you can be inside the character's head. You know what they're thinking, and they tell you how they're feeling. With a television show, obviously you have to see it, because people don't tell you. Come up and say, "I don't really feel like going to school today, Mom, because I just feel like reading a book," and you can't just say that stuff.
Right.
It's boring on television, so you have to act it. So it requires a different kind of writing. Plus, of course, you're reading, right? It's like I've always thought of it as like writing haiku, because you get 55 pages, and it has really wide margins. These programs don't give you any space, so you really wind up having to pare things down really tightly. Whereas a book, you can kind of spread out.
Yeah, haiku's an interesting thought. I actually asked Ann Perry last night if her novellas wouldn't make better viewing, whether it was a script or a movie, than the books, because there's so much extra stuff in books that doesn't translate, as you say,
Yeah, you can't
into
get
a
it there.
visual media. So I have a question. Is living in Hollywood, does it make it more, I don't know what the right word is. Is there a sort of an impulse to have your work translated to film or television that maybe doesn't affect authors in Boston or Chicago as much?
It might, it might, because when you're right there, everybody has access to you. It's not
Right.
difficult. You don't have to take a flight to go anywhere. I have an agent. I have a couple of agents at UTA now, and they take the book. They look. I go, oh, this could sell, and then they just go and see the studios. You know what I mean? It's so easy. It's just right
Right.
there. So.
Well, I think it's both things. I mean, I thought access certainly is a large part of it, but I also wonder if it's that whole bit about if you can make it there applying to New York and Broadway, and if you're an actor now, then maybe if you're an author who lives in Los Angeles, you are almost driven to want to have a movie because then you made it, right?
It's true. I think the other thing is that if you can get a series up that's based on your
Right.
books, it helps to sell the books. People go become
Remarkable.
aware of you. Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. I've also noticed that you are on a much more accelerated writing schedule. We're talking May and now November, so that's every 6 months every 6 months. These 2 books are 6 months apart.
Yeah.
So what is your plan for book 3, assuming you're going out with it?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of writing book 3 right now. That one won't come out until August.
So it's slowing
So,
down a little.
Yeah, I had to, because I'm working on a pilot. So, there's just too much to do and not enough time to do it. So I think they kind of prefer to do every 9 months or so, 9 or 10 months, as opposed to 6 months. And I think that's probably gonna be better for me too. That was crazy. Putting out 2 books in a year was craziness. It was just,
Well, it's interesting. Some authors really want to. Some authors have gone to different publishing routes because they can't publish fast enough in conventional publishing. And some authors would like way more time.
yeah.
You know, I think it's so individual.
It is.
But, you know, I do think that 6 months with all the other things you've been doing was remarkably high pressure.
It was too much because of everything else going on, and I'm still handling cases.
Right.
So, you know, between the caseload and the pilot and the, you know, it gets to be a little bit much. So I'm glad I have a little more time.
Do you have much personal life with all this?
I have none.
I don't have a lot either, so, you know, I have a really understanding
Really?
husband, but he's really nice. I mean, most nights Rob comes home with the dog, says, I leave to come down here, and, you know, we travel in part just so we can actually see each other, because we live here, we hardly ever do. It's just a whole different deal. Right, well, that's wonderful. I bet you all have questions. Now, just remember the OJ penalty. I'm gonna stand up and talk about the 7th inning, or actually the bottom of the 10th. And you too, because I see another cup shirt right over there. Yay. Anyway, questions? It's all yours.
Yeah.
It's a subject I've discussed with a number of authors. My belief is that courtroom lawyers make really wonderful writers. Judges make really poor writers. Do you agree? And can you explain why you would agree?
I think it depends on the judge. But I know what you mean. You know, judges, because they're referees and they're not in the mix themselves, they don't tell the stories. They don't have to think about how to put the case together in a way that a jury will find compelling. Lawyers do. That's what they do every day. So there's a skill that you build doing the job as a lawyer that you don't build as a judge. And I think their more passive role kind of doesn't encourage that as much. That's not to say that a judge couldn't be a great writer, because, you know, any individual judge might be. But I think that might be why, at least in my opinion, trial lawyers are probably more likely to be good writers or good storytellers.
I think judges, you know, they don't like to be reviewed, so this is me in law school coming back, but there have only been like half a dozen judges here at Courts. My favorite is Cyril Hare, who actually sat on a Woolsack. Isn't that cool? He's a British judge, and in his most famous book, Tragedy at Law, Francis Pettigrew, his guy, barrister, he writes the circuit in the 1930s, and he is preceded by trumpeters. I mean, how cool is that? Right. And he wrote several books, but he wrote them under a pseudonym because as a judge of the High Court, he couldn't do anything as, you know, crass as actually writing mystery. In this country, the 2 most successful ones have been administrative judges. One was William Coughlin, both from Michigan, strangely enough. And the other one, I always forget it. It was a huge bestseller in the 1970s. Does anybody remember from the last time I had this blank who he was? Movie, enormous success. I just can't think of it. But anyway, he too was an administrative judge from Michigan. But I can't, they're hard to, in a trial. Can you think of one, Joel? A trial judge that's
No,
page?
I managed to offend a lot of
Looking at the
judges
lawyers
by describing them as high-priced spectators. And I think that's part of it. Judges in a trial are much more spectator than actor.
Yeah, there was a judge, a JAG, I think, a military judge, I think, actually wrote a thriller or a book or something, but since my mind is porous, I can't recall who it is. Anyway, right, Robert somebody wrote, God, it was a great book, great bestseller. Oh well, anyway, onward.
Yeah.
Did you think that you might want to be a writer one day when you were being, doing all your OJ stuff and all the other things you did back in the 90s and 80s? When did you decide that writing would be a good thing?
I decided that I wanted to be a writer when I was a little kid. That bug bit me really, really young. And and it was crime fiction from the time I was really little. And I mean like 5, and I was reading Nancy Drew and all that. I mean, I just loved that stuff. So I just didn't have any faith that I could actually make a living at it. you know, it seemed like too much fun to make a living at it. How can you make money doing that? So, so I didn't do it. And then what actually got me into writing books was, after the trial, I left the prosecutor's office. I wound up being a consultant on a television show called For the People at Lifetime, right? And then I started writing scripts. And then the creator of that, we went out and we wrote scripts for, pilot script for FX, Lifetime, VH1, and comedy treatment for NBC. So, you know, it was script writing that got me into books. And I thought, after a while, we did that for a few years, and after a while I thought, you know, I think that if I'm ever gonna do this, realize the childhood dream, it'll be now. So I did.
Well, before I forget, Robert Travers, Anatomy of a Murder.
Ah,
That's the book,
it.
and it is
Great one.
absolutely fabulous.
That's
If
a
you've
great
not read it, it has, even though it was written in the 70s, it is not really dated. I urge you to try to find a copy online or in your library or something and read it. It was brilliant.
Yeah, that was it's a classic.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you remember? What made you remember it?
You know, here's proof that you don't, when you get old, you don't actually forget stuff. What it is the retrieval system has slowed down because, you know, if you really forgot it, it wouldn't come back to you, right? I could just hear it like, whir. Sounds like my, you know. I'm really serious. This is my, and if medicine ever figures out a way to sort of clear the gunk out of your neural connections as you get old, you won't, you know, there's just too much stuff in there.
And yeah, I think it's that. You know, when you're relatively young, you don't have a whole lot of things stored up in your
Exactly.
memory banks. You don't have to search very far to find one particular memory. But you've got a lot of them now. I've got a lot of them now. Right? So there's just much more to go through. Even if your brain is working
Exactly.
top speed, it's
Yeah.
still got
The
more.
computer
files.
analogy, it really works.
Yeah, you go.
You just saw living proof. All right, sorry, there was a question.
So I've been a prosecutor almost 10 years because of you.
Oh my God!
And-
I'm honored. Are you glad?
Yeah.
Or do you blame me?
A little bit. Depends on the day, right?
Yeah.
My question is about your moving forward with the TV series and looking back on you as a prosecutor. You mentioned Making a Murderer in the Serial podcast, and what I find is they're entertaining, but they're, I would argue, biased, and they're not telling things the right way.
Yes.
Or accurately, especially Making a Murderer. And so it's a real problem for me as a prosecutor because the jurors that I'm trying to convince to do the right thing are watching Making a Murderer thinking it's a documentary. So my question for you is...
Boy, I remember that feeling like that too.
Yeah.
You know, God, you guys are now thinking that's true, and I'm with you. And Making of a Murderer, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just
No,
wanna
please,
go
please.
with you and say, I had that feeling about it too. I felt the bias. I knew they were keeping things out. I later found out that they did.
Yeah.
I think it left me with a very murky feeling about what was true and what was not. But my biggest worry used to be with stuff like that, how the juries are seeing it. So
Yeah.
I feel you, man.
Thank
I
you.
feel you.
So my question really is that, and whether that feeling, do you think that feeling from when you were a prosecutor all those years ago will bleed into how your TV show, what you allow Hollywood to do, or how you will write it to try to keep the line of what is real versus what is exciting and what is entertaining for America?
Yeah, you bet. It's always going to be there will always be this kind of tension between the desire, the need to make it dramatic and make it interesting.
Right.
Because let's face it, if we tell the normal stories, right, everybody goes to sleep.
Right.
It takes 2 beats.
Yeah.
You know, she cheated on me, I'm going to kill her. Boom. You know, and that's okay. That's not a very good story. So you have to have something. You know, it's got to be a man bites dog story. But within the confines of that, I think you can tell the truth about how things really go. And the good news is NBC has been very supportive in saying we want this to be grounded, we want this to feel real, and the showrunners I'm working with are into it too. So we just did like a whole scene where they wanted Samantha, to have a big win early on. I said, what? The audience isn't going to care about whatever case she's winning. And we don't just go in and argue that way and do it like that. So what I did was I made a motion to continue into this big, long pitch for the defense. So the defense attorney is telling the judge what she's intending to prove, all in the context of making the prosecutor want the continuance so he can investigate it.
Okay.
Because the prosecutor's a good guy, he doesn't want to, convict an innocent guy.
Right.
So in that way, we're trying to do it realistically. It's pulled out, for sure, but the prosecutor is depicted as a decent person who's trying to do the right thing. And really, Samantha is the one who's playing fast and loose. which we know is true. See? So we're gonna try and keep it real. Did you?
I did. I'm just curious when you have time to write. It sounds like you have so many different careers going on. Do you say I'm going to write from 7 to 9 every morning? Does it just come to you when you sit down, or do you schedule it?
Schedule it. You have to do it like a job. You know, you get up in the morning, you sit down, you know, whatever case of work I have to do, I try to make, you know, take care of that, and then carve out at least 4 or 5 hours a day. You just sit and write, whether you feel motivated or not. There is no time for writer's block. It's like, no, that's not happening. So whatever it takes, just start writing and just do it. You knowing that, of course, especially if you're not feeling inspired that day, you're going to wind up cutting a lot of that, but it does get the wheels turning. So.
There's one over here. Didn't you have a question? No? Just like weird. Sorry. Okay.
I wondered if you came from a family of attorneys and if your children decided to go into the law, just how your experience as an attorney, which was so dramatic, how it affected other people in your family.
It didn't.
Oh.
No one in my family was a lawyer, and neither of my sons went into law at all. They were never interested. It wasn't even like they couldn't even do me a little like, gee, Mom, that might be cool, but for a second, just to make me feel good. No. It was like, anybody want to go to law school? No. And they didn't. So yeah, no one cared.
Yes.
I hate to be greedy. I have 3 questions. Who are your writing influences?
Oh, they are myriad. I really have to say, when I say I can't even, it's so funny you asked me that tonight, because I was just thinking about that this morning, so I was getting ready to come here. And I was reading something online, you know, all the online stuff, especially, you know, crime-related stuff, and I realized that the writing style of everyone I read influences me. Whether it's an online zine, whether it's an op-ed piece, or a novel, or nonfiction, everything is an influence. It really, in terms of who I admire, many. I really like the noir writers. I love James Ellroy. Jim Thompson is a big fave. Of course, Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett. In terms of currently, one of my favorite writers that I think is not well enough recognized here, you'll know her, is Sarah Waters. And yeah, she's written, in fact, one of her books, The Fingersmith, is coming out as a feature called, of all things, why would they make this title The Handmaiden?
Because it's Korean. They moved it out of England into Korea.
Oh.
That's what I do in the morning when I'm reading the New York Times. Read the film section. No, seriously, that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, so they had to call it something that was more Oriental.
Korean friendly.
Yeah, it's a lesbian book. I mean, the romance plot. Is,
Yeah.
Right.
Although that gives it away.
Sorry.
Yeah.
If you'd read the review of the movie, you would already know that.
No, you're right.
No,
That's right.
it
They
does.
do. They give it away.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's so intricately plotted, and it's an amazing story. But what I love the most about it is it really delivers a feeling of Victorian England, and the realities of life for people in Victorian England back in that time when there was really kind of a caste system, and if you're poor, you stay poor, you know. And it was a really incredible view into the world in England at that time.
You can see from the authors that she's mentioned that Marcia's not a cream puff in her reading, right? Those are really tough authors. James Ellroy, I can't even read all of James Ellroy. Patrick, have you made it all the way through James Ellroy?
You know, I think what he's doing now. Did you read Perfidia? I thought it was
No, that's
fantastic.
on my list.
He
Did you?
he lost me for about 5 books,
Yeah,
but then he's back.
He's back.
And yeah,
Perfidia.
I love him. Yeah.
I'm gonna get there. Yeah, you know what, I drop in and out of everybody because I want to sample everything. So I haven't read him in a while, but he was like one of my first really early inspirations in terms of, you know, that kind of thriller writing. He's just, God, some people know how to put words together in ways that are fascinating. Like, how'd you think of that? You know, he's one of
Right.
those guys. But thanks for the rec.
Actually, I have a question for you real quick. We have,
Okay, he has one more.
Oh.
Go
for it.
You go ahead, and then we'll go back to him. Right.
Is there any residual effects professionally and personally that's affected you from the trial of the century?
You get to talk about the Cubs.
I'm gonna talk about that. Did you see the 10th inning? Boy, it was
Yeah.
Seriously, you could not write a thriller that was any better paced than that game last night.
I've got a better question.
Okay,
Earlier you talked
you
about
must be
how,
with him. Sorry, I should.
how there's like personal biases and stuff with jurors. Have you ever thought about writing a book from like a juror perspective, kind of like a modern 12 Angry Men? 'Cause like
I really have.
with juries and stuff, you have to kind of almost like de-CSI them or, remove them from the whole criminal shows and stuff that everybody watches.
Yeah,
Have you ever thought about writing from that perspective?
I have. It would have to be a standalone.
Mhm.
So that would mean taking time off from Samantha to write that standalone. But I have thought about it before. I even started writing one. I did an outline for one, and it wasn't working. But I love the idea of it. I really want to do it. So I'd like to actually serve on a jury once to get a perspective on that. I know, right? Everybody tells me that.
I'd be
It'll
really
never happen.
surprised if they let you on a
Exactly.
jury. Even I get struck off the juries, they always say, go
You
wait over.
definitely.
Well, now I'm too old, but, before that, I would show up and they'd say, over there.
Yeah, of
Right.
course. I mean, with all your experience, of course they're not going to let you serve, and neither am I. So I'm never going to get to see it really inside of a jury. So what I might do, actually, is talk to the people I know who have served on a jury and kind of see if I can find something there, because I'm fascinated by that, the idea of that, and the biases that people bring that they're not even aware of. It's one thing when you know. Look, and jurors say this all the time. They'll say, I can't be fair. He's a gangbanger. I really have a thing about gangs. I just can't do it. And I would always tell them, but see, you're the best kind of juror because you know. It's the bias that you don't acknowledge that is the problem, not the one.
They kept me in a jury pool for 5 days, and I was in the middle of studying forensic technology, and I was working for the San Diego Police Department.
Oh,
Just like,
come on.
you have at least 5 pages of complete and utter truth right there, where you should have just let me go the first day, and you kept me on for that long.
That was brutal. Why'd they do that?
Torture, maybe.
Just wanted to shape you up for your future
No,
career.
it's just not fair. I mean, it's not fair. When you have that kind of background, there's no way a defense attorney's going to let you sit. I think it's terribly unfair that they shouldn't yank us around like that. It's not right.
Because I would have had some fun. But
Yeah.
Okay, Rick, what was your question?
I don't think I'm heading into Chicago Cubs territory. I really got a kick out of your Twitter handle, and it is what is it? That Marcia Clark. Yeah, I thought that was
It really
awesome.
is, because I don't deserve any credit for it. I couldn't use my own name. It was when I was with Hachette, and they wanted me to do Twitter and Facebook and all the stuff that I had been resisting so successfully up until then, and said, no, you have to do this because you want to connect with your readers. Okay, I do this, true. So do this. So I tried to get it using my name, Marcia Clark. Somebody else had it. So yeah. So now what do I do? Marcia Clark 1 2 3 or something stupid like that. She goes, no, do that, Marcia Clark.
And also, yeah, I wanted to ask too. We asked you in the back room, but tell us about your trip to the Emmys. I'm sure there was a bit of surreal kind of gratification.
That was crazy. So did you guys any? I don't know if anybody here saw the miniseries on FX. People vs. O.J. Simpson.
Oh, yes.
You saw that? Yeah. So Sarah Paulson played. It was a 6-part miniseries. Sarah Paulson played me, and we wound up becoming. Nobody got consulted during the making of that miniseries. They didn't talk to any of us, and that was a very deliberate choice. They did not want the actors to be influenced by us. They didn't want the writers to be. Yeah, that was the way they chose to go. So I didn't meet Sarah until basically the whole thing was in the can. And that first dinner that we had, the first thing I said to her was, I'm sorry about that hair, man. We had a really good time. We drank tequila all night and shut the restaurant down. It was crazy. And then we became friends after that. And then she said, when the Emmys were approaching, I want you to come with me. And my first instinct was, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not an actor. I don't belong there. And I thought, she really did. I thought, but I really do want to cheer her on. I want to be supportive, So I wound up going. And it was crazy. It's crazy. Because you're sitting there, and everybody that you've seen on TV, and on film, stuff like that, they're just right there. Right there. Yeah. There's John Travolta. Oh, that's true. America Ferrera was like right there. It was crazy. So that was really fun, and it was so hot. It was so hot that doing the red carpet, I walked the red carpet with Sarah, it was like walking on the sun. You know? And she had this little handheld fan that we passed back and forth between us, because like you almost couldn't breathe. It was so insane. So it was actually really, it was a cool night. It was really fun. My exciting life. One night, just one. And then I went back to work. Yeah.
I'll be greedy too. I'm wondering if you had any qualms about writing from the perspective of a defense attorney, since you're known as like the prosecutor. Did that play into your decision at all? Were you hesitant?
No. You know, because at the end of the day, when it comes to, especially, well, anything, I was going to say fiction, but probably nonfiction too, you have to write what you want to write. You know, you really have to follow your own instinct that way, and you can't like position yourself, well, people won't like me if I do X or Y, because then you won't be genuine and it won't ring, it won't work, you know, and the readers will feel it. They'll feel it's a contrivance. They'll feel that you're just, you know, cobbling it together. So, at least for me, I think, I couldn't pull that off. So I had to really write from the heart, this is where I want to go, I want to write this really weird character. And if you actually read her, Samantha Bricken, you will like her, because she's different. But she definitely comes from that point of view. And it was fun, actually, to tell you the truth, to write from the defense point of view, which is I don't have to prove anything. Right? All I have to do is create reasonable doubt. So all I'm looking for is smoke and mirrors and red herring here and red herring there, and that's all I'm going to do. Of course, she winds up doing more because it's fiction and it's a book and all that stuff, but it is a very different mindset. And so it was fun to step into that.
We actually have a quote here from Vulture, made in April of this year, in which she said, there are more interesting moral and ethical wrinkles to writing the defense side because the defense attorney's goal is solely to defend the client. The prosecutor has to make sure it's a fair trial. The defense has no obligation. And, you know, I think that's really, I mean, we all know that Earl Stanley Gardner, you know, the Curry Mason, he couldn't have gotten away, seriously, with any of it, you know, it was just ridiculous.
Right.
But it certainly was true that, you know, if you can figure out a way to pull a rabbit out of a hat, or, you know, come in with a surprise witness, or whatever, you know, that's fair tactics on the defense side, but the prosecutor, you know, doesn't get to do that. So I talk to Linda Fairstein every year, you know, it's kind of fun because, and she's just written, by the way, a Nancy Drew book.
I heard about that.
And
Isn't that cool?
she's on her way to sending some to us, but she's starting a, I can't think, I just wrote it up, and I'm going to have never seen the moment. Anyway, she has a young sleuth that's like a modern Nancy Drew, and she thought it would be fun because that was such a big influence for her,
For her too.
you know, to write a series for kids. And it seems to have had a very good, I haven't read it yet because I'm waiting for the copies to show up. But I thought, wow, that was really, you know.
It's cool.
So that may be her way out of the prosecutor role because you know, she is, you know, still writing about a prosecutor.
Right.
So maybe that's her release, is going into the teen fiction.
Yeah, and it's a cool thing to do. I mean, Nancy Drew, I think, was kind of an inspiring character for a lot of us, and I think it is kind of one of those truisms about if you can't, you have to see it to be it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why those kind of characters, whether they're fictional or real, inspire women and girls to do things they ordinarily wouldn't believe they could, you know, because there are still social pressures about what women are allowed to do and what men are allowed to do and sort of thing, especially back then. And so Nancy Drew, that iconic character, really I think probably inspired a lot of us back in the day. And for her to pay it forward and bring it up, you know, bring it back.
I think it's great. It's called Into the Lion's Den, once again. That's the title comes out. I know, it's so exciting to do that. I really thought about that, you know, that if you had been trained in one side, you know, but you've seen the other one, that, you know, Michael Connelly tried that with Mickey Haller, remember?
Right.
He shot, well, yeah, but it was like, what was it, three or four, somewhere in there? Where Haller tried to be a defense attorney, you know, or, no, prosecutor.
The
sorry.
reversal.
Yeah, he did a role reversal thing, but it just didn't really work for the character, so he did the one and you thought, oh wow, maybe he's gonna start off, you know, on a new track, and then no, he went back. But I thought that was Michael's attempt, you know, or not attempt, it was successful. That was Michael's way to write the other side.
Yeah.
And see how You know, it's interesting to me that two of the people who write the most interesting legal thrillers, John LeSparr and Michael Connelly, neither of them is a lawyer.
Yeah.
And John LeSparr always gives credit to his friend Al, who apparently, you know, mows his way through the books and fixes all the stuff that, you know, could be wrong. But John is a genius for the legal thriller, which I find so interesting. But he comes at it as an outsider, you know.
Yeah.
So, and then there's Steve Martini and other lawyers who. Do you remember a woman named Leah Matera? Did you ever run across Leah Matera? She wrote a whole lot of legal thrillers in the 90s, and she had a sign over her desk that said "Publish or Practice." So, you know, she eventually didn't publish, and I always wondered if she went back to practicing law. You know, as the
Sounds like it,
default.
yeah.
I know, I don't really know, but you know, so that was all interesting. But I thought a lot of firm lawyers, you know, and maybe it's true for you too. Hobson lawyers write crime fiction, I think, in part to correct things or to make things come out right that maybe didn't go as well as they could have. You know, or maybe tell the real story they couldn't tell in court. Has that been true for you at all?
I think it is. I think there's a way in which I want to tell everybody how things really work. Not exactly, obviously, these stories are, you know, what they are, but in an essence, yeah. You know, the way in which prosecutors and defense lawyers really do interact. You know, we're not at each other's throats. Largely, at least in my experience, we got along. We understood the roles that each of us played. So, you know, there was, yeah, you fight, you mean it, you know, but you also understand what each other's doing, and the ways in which a case can be affected by so many different things. These things are all true, you know, the way the media can impact the case, the way, and the lawyers spinning and all of that sort of thing, that can affect a case. The makeup of the jury, a million ways in which a case can be pushed this way and that way. You want to tell the truth about all that to the greatest extent possible. So I think, yeah, the effort is certainly there to tell the truth about things that ordinarily people wouldn't see.
We have a series that I edit and we publish on Poison Pen Press. St. Louis, he's really fabulous. His field is actually intellectual property and copyright and other stuff. In fact, he's the reason we're called the Poison Pen, which was a saga in the Copyright Office because there was a woman who owned a poison pen. Have I ever told you that?
No.
Yeah, when we went to Trademark, the store, he did all his research and he came back and he said, somebody owns Poison Pen. It's too close. We'll have to get her to sign off on our application. He said, I'm having no luck, so you try. So I called this woman, and she was really hostile. And then we talked for a while, and then we talked for a while, and then we talked more. And finally I asked the question that always seems to work. I said, so who do you like to read the best? And she said, Lindsay Davis, who's a British author who writes historical crime fiction. I said, well, if you were willing to sign this application, I will give you a signed copy of every book Lindsay Davis writes as long as she, you know, is still signing books for us. And done. You know, she said, so it was like that, what was the rent that they used, that peppercorn rent?
Yeah.
You know, in England, when you had a sweet deal on property or something, you would pay peppercorn every year, you know, for the rent. So remember that, Patrick?
No.
Well, it was the year that you came to work here, but I guess I spared you all the legal details.
I've never heard that
of the
story. That's
bookstore,
funny.
Right, anyway, so we got to do that. But Michael writes these hilarious stories, not about prosecutors or defendants, but about Rachel Gold, who most of the stories, I mean, there's generally a murder in them, really tie into business and all. And his favorite character is the backroom lawyer. The guy, the super geek, you know, that you would never let out of the back room, and whose whole strength is case law research, you know, and he'll come leaping out and start quoting all this. But Michael can actually make it funny, you know, and interesting. He's just written a one-off for me about baseball, and you can see there's a baseball theme to it. You can see how it's going to go, but you're so caught up in it, you know, wondering how the lawyer is going to outsmart the other lawyer, and the mensch, you know, from the back room is actually going to have to step up and become a prosecutor and step into court for the first time ever. And it's just so much fun because I like reading about lawyers whose roles aren't defined yet or, you know, are flexible. Anyway, if you like legal fiction, you might want to try Michael's books. There are like 12 of them now, and that's a book that's going to come out. And I had a burst of genius today because we couldn't come up with a title, and because there are all these scams going on, I said we're going to call it. Here's the Cubs. Here it comes again. We're going to call it Played with an exclamation point, and it's going to be a baseball bat with a ball. That's the exclamation point. I was inspired by the game last night. Is that great? Anybody have a final question or two they'd like to ask? Cindy?
Well, when you write, and I asked Ann Perry this last night, when you write, do you know where the characters are going? Do you know the end when you write, or do you just, I've heard authors say, well, I just, I write and I never know where it's going until it goes there. How do you approach it?
I do not do that. I do not believe in that. I always do an outline. I want to know exactly where my story's going. And so it's about a 30 or 40 page outline. I don't really know how people write, particularly thrillers. Literary fiction might be a different story. But thrillers, you have to see your, these little kernels of clues and things all the way through, so not in a way that's not obvious. And in order to be able to do that and time it properly, you have to see how it all shakes out. I don't know how you just write by the seat of your pants and hope that things kind of come together. I'm in this genre. I don't know.
Yeah, but
What
don't you
I do
think
feel, though-
logic is more intrinsic to your stories than, like Harlan Coben and Domestic Suspense?
Yeah,
where you
there might
can
be.
kind of make stuff up, but you can't really do that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, I'm much more bound by what really happens. That said, still people do write legal thrillers, and they say that I don't know if I believe them. They're probably lying, right?
But,
Yeah.
You just have a plan and know where it's going.
Exactly. The thing is, I do feel free to disregard the outline if I think it's not right. I'll get to a point, oh, she wouldn't do that, or oh, I don't like that, or I have a better idea. So I'm not wedded to the outline, but I certainly do have one. And, I think it does make for a better put together story, ultimately.
This gentleman over here has a question.
How do you come up with the ideas of the books?
The ideas come from everywhere. Just walking through the world, reading what's online, and reading books and just watching TV. It comes from everything I'll just see somebody walking down the street and he's wearing a trench coat and his shoe has a hole in it, and I start to think about who is that person, how did he get there, and then the whole story starts to evolve around him, you know what I mean? Like that. It just comes from everywhere.
Is what if your motivating question?
Um,
What if this, then what if, and then what if?
Sometimes, in this case, in moral defense for sure, Cassie Sonnenberg, I happened to bump into this website about being adopted and the issues that adopted children have. And all these kids wrote in, and they wrote these heartrending stories. And there was this entire spectrum. Some who were really struggling with it and had trouble with it, others who were completely happy in their homes, and everything in between. And so I thought about, okay, but what if, here's a girl dropped into suburbia and her brother's like this and her father's like that. What if, and, played it out through that. What are the ripples in the family and what happens next, and how does Samantha relate to this girl and all the rest of it. So I think.
So do you think that authors are people where we might take something for granted or just not think about it much, start to say what if? I mean, I sometimes think you're just more curious than the rest of us.
That might be true. I mean, certainly choosing to be a criminal lawyer, I think that curiosity plays a big factor in that. Because criminal law in particular is about people's stories and motivations and why they did this. And a jury needs to know why. We don't have to prove it, but they always want to know it. So, and if you don't give a jury a reason that is understandable, you're in trouble. So, but I always wanted to know anyway. So, I mean, I kind of think that it's a self-selecting thing. The people who are kind of curious and want to probe and want to know why and how and what go into that kind of world, law, or fiction writing, that kind of thing.
Anybody else have a question? Well, I want to thank Marcia, and I apologize to all of you. I screwed up last May, and as a result, Marcia did not get to come here. Sometimes we have to plan things out months and months in advance, and we ran into a collision of dates, so it just didn't work out. But anyway, I'm really delighted that you have an opportunity to listen to her. I'm always fascinated. We always have the most interesting discussions, don't we? For those who haven't been here before, this came up the other night. Let me just say something to you. Many of you come from great distances to come to the store tonight. We always feel that we ought to deliver you at least an hour of programming in order, to make that worth your while. We can only talk about the book and the plot for a few minutes, so that's where all this other stuff sort of comes from. It's hard for an author to do a stand-up monologue for over an hour. If only 10 minutes of it can be about the book, then what else do we talk about? Sometimes audiences are really live, and you guys ask questions and we don't have to do anything, but sometimes that's not the case, and then I have to pick up all this stuff, much of which may seem to you irrelevant, but I hope it's at least entertaining, but that's how it goes. So, the book is kind of your ticket to the evening, is the way we look at it here, because you could have gone to the movies, or you could have stayed home and watched, not tonight, you couldn't have watched the Cubs. I'm ending on that, right? I'm definitely ending on the Cubs. Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you very much.
Because, fascinatingly enough, some of you may remember the non-lawyer, Patricia. Are you turning this off? Please turn it off before I say this. Thank you.
Hold on just a sec.
Now I'm interested.
Yeah, well, here's how it is, right?
Stop broadcast.
Are you off broadcasting? Okay. So back when I was reading law in Virginia, there was, you're off, right?
It's off.
There was a woman who was married to a who was married to who was married to a who was married